You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's February the 29th. It's an extra day of New York stories today. I'm Dominic Hall-Thomas.
And I'm Clara Bouders. Restaurant owners will have to take down outdoor dining sheds next winter.
That entire structure is going to have to just be demolished and trashed, and we're going to have to start fresh.
And journalists are grappling with the potential of AI and ethics.
It's kind of like how we approached Wikipedia when that first came out. It's a great source of information, but it's also very wrong, and you shouldn't take it at face value.
And for some couples, today's a perfect time to take a big leap in their relationship.
Hey, that's pretty cool. Every 4 years, we'll get to celebrate our anniversary.
So what would you do with an extra day, Clara?
I'd probably spend it tuning into Uptown Radio.
Well, that's a good choice. But first, it's the news.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Biden and former President Trump are both in Texas today visiting the southern border. Trump is in Eagle Pass, where he's focusing on problems associated with record numbers of migrants crossing the border. Biden is in Brownsville, where he plans to talk about the Senate border deal that almost happened. The Texas newsroom, Sergio Martinez Beltran, has more.
President Biden is meeting U.S. Border Patrol agents and Brownsville local officials. Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas is also with the president. Both are calling on Congress to hire more border agents and reform the asylum process. But none of them plan to meet with local immigrant rights groups, something advocates say is a slap on their faces. Meanwhile, former President Trump is in Eagle Pass, the area Texas Governor Greg Abbott has used to test his border security enforcement laws. Trump and Biden's visits come 5 days before Super Tuesday. For NPR News, I'm Sergio Martinez Beltran in Brownsville, Texas.
Conflicting accounts continue to emerge from northern Gaza over what prompted Israeli forces to open fire today on large crowds of people who were waiting for food. More than 100 people were killed and scores more were wounded. NPR's Michelle Kellerman has more.
State Department spokesman Matthew Miller says one thing is clear from the aerial footage of the scene in Gaza. Desperate Palestinians were swarming the aid trucks.
You can look at that and right away conclude the situation is incredibly desperate. That people are swarming these trucks because they're hungry, because they need food, because they need medicine and other assistance. And that tells you that we need to do more to get humanitarian assistance in.
But he says the best way to do that would be to finish negotiations on a deal between Israel and Hamas that would see a 6-week pause in fighting and the release of more Israeli hostages. And he says Egypt and Qatar, who are mediating, agree. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
Congress is still facing down the threat of another partial government shutdown, just probably not by this weekend. The House has voted to approve a short-term spending bill, and the Senate's poised to hold a vote possibly by the end of the day to extend agreement-reaching deadlines to March 8th and 22nd. Annual inflation cooled a bit last month, but not all the news on prices was so encouraging. Here's NPR's Scott Horsley.
The Commerce Department's inflation yardstick, which is closely watched by the Federal Reserve, shows prices in January were up 2.4% from a year ago. That's a slightly smaller annual increase than the month before. Prices rose 0.3% between December and January, though, which is an acceleration from the previous month. The Fed wants more evidence of cooling inflation before it starts cutting interest rates. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
U.S. stocks have ended the day higher. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed up 32 points to end at 38,981. From Washington, this is NPR News.
In New York, I'm Samuel Eli Shepard. An MTA subway conductor has been released from the hospital after being slashed in the neck at a Brooklyn subway station early this morning. MTA Transit SVP at Demetrius Critchlow told CBS that the MTA takes assaults against its staff seriously.
We have to give our conductors, we have to give our employees, our station agents, we have to give them the confidence that we support them and that we're going to keep them safe.
On Monday, the MTA began testing out barriers in subway stations across the city to prevent further attacks. The no standing zones are aimed to create distance between passengers and conductors. If the pilot program is successful, the MTA says that they may install more barriers across the city. That is, if New Yorkers will respect the purpose of the barriers. The NYPD shut down an illegal migrant shelter yesterday in a juice bar in the Fordham neighborhood of the Bronx. The man who ran the shelter, Abu Sar, also ran a storefront shelter in Queens that was shut down earlier this week. Saar, who is himself an immigrant, charged migrants upwards of $300 a month to stay. He told NBC that he had good intentions.
This is the situation. This is what we're trying to avoid, for them to be out there in this cold weather.
Inspectors from the Department of Buildings said that they found nearly 50 beds pressed together in the Bronx storefront and numerous fire hazards, including loose extension cords, space heaters, and e-bikes. The MTA is holding a public hearing tonight to discuss congestion pricing. The program, which starts in June, will charge passenger cars entering Manhattan below 61st Street a $15 fee, which will go into funding the city's struggling transit system. The first of 4 public hearings on the policy will occur at 6 p.m. tonight at the MTA offices in Battery Park. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is celebrating the opening of the first legal cannabis dispensary in Brooklyn, owned by a black woman. Adams said the moment was an opportunity to right historical wrongs by empowering black business owners to build wealth through the legal cannabis industry. It's cloudy this afternoon with temperatures around 40 degrees. Northbound C trains are running with delays due to mechanical problems. A trains are running with delays in both directions for track maintenance. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Samuel Eli Shepard.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Dominic Hall-Thomas.
And I'm Clara Bouders.
Earlier this morning, a subway conductor was attacked at the Rockaway Avenue stop in Bed-Stuy. He was slashed in the neck. We're just 2 months into the year, and there have been 2 murders and more than 50 assaults in subway stations and on trains. But just last year, Mayor Adams announced crime rates in the city had significantly decreased. So what's going on? Uptown Radio's Julia Leo has been following the story. Can you break down what's happened?
Sure. Around 3:40 a.m. this morning, conductor Alton Scott was on a southbound A train that had just reached the Rockaway Avenue station. As conductors usually do, he stuck his head out to make sure the train was ready to pull away. That's when he was attacked by a man with a sharp object. Police don't know what it was, possibly a box cutter. He's in stable conditions now, but authorities believe it was a random attack.
So, in January, Mayor Adams called New York the safest big city in America. Is that statement still true? I mean, considering the amount of transit attacks we've seen lately?
So we did see a decline in overall crime last year, but transit incidents actually skyrocketed. According to the NYPD, there were 570 reports of assault on trains or in stations. That was the highest number in more than 2 decades. As for this year, so far, transit crime is up 18% compared to the same time last year. The city says it's working on solutions, including additional officers and surveillance cameras. And just a few days ago, the MTA installed conductor safety barriers on the 125th Street station to protect workers from attacks like the one that happened today.
So, what exactly is a safety barrier?
Basically, they're rubber poles. They're 4 feet tall, bright orange, and they're right on the platform next to the conductor's car. They're hard to miss, but I do have to say they don't seem that hard to cross.
Do people not just ignore them?
For the most part, yeah. Apparently, riders have been crossing the poles to ask the conductors questions. So it seems they're not as effective as the MTA was hoping.
And the mayor is also planning to add more police officers and stations, right?
Yeah, that's correct. He's following de Blasio's footsteps, trying to increase police presence. Adams asked for state funds to pay police officers for longer hours. Last week, Governor Hochul says she plans to meet with Adams to discuss his plan. But it is unclear when this conversation will happen.
Well, Julia, thanks for catching us up.
Thank you.
Restaurant owners who want to keep the outdoor dining sheds they built during COVID are soon going to have to apply to keep them. And if they are approved, they'll face a bunch of new rules starting next winter.
Among the biggest changes, well, structures that extend into the street will have to be fully removed from November to April. Then, when those sheds come back next spring, they look really different. They'll have canopies instead of hard roofs, barriers to keep out rats, and they must be wheelchair accessible.
I wonder where they'll put them. As Cecilia Blotto reports, some restaurant owners are not sure it will be worth the trouble.
In the heart of Park Slope is The Commissioner, a vibrant bar with an Irish pub feel. At 2 p.m. last Monday, its rows of brown leather stools were almost all vacant, aside from a few usual customers. Brendan Burns is the owner. He's having a coffee at the bar. He says the outdoor space he built during COVID was so popular he was able to open a new location in Manhattan. The outdoor shed here is cozy, with heaters, white fairy lights and speakers. Burns would like to keep it, but he's worried.
That entire structure is going to have to just be demolished and trashed, and we're going to have to start fresh, which I think is probably going to be 98% of the structures you see.
From next week, restaurants can apply for outdoor dining under new rules. But these are hefty 31 pages long, and Burns knows his current setup doesn't meet these requirements. Among them, structures must be easy to dismantle because they need to be taken down during the winter months, from late November to early April.
Not to mention the storage fees and all that jazz, but it is daunting.
Just the license fee for an outdoor space is over $1,000. Then there's the demolition. Burns says that in summer, people don't want to sit in a dark bar. Instead, they flood the outdoor space. And what if his application were rejected?
I think if we don't have an outdoor option, all of that will be gone. I hope that we'll be able to continue outdoor dining, but I'm not 100% confident that it'll be a reality for us.
A subway ride away, on the Upper West Side, Nicole Painter runs the Columbus Avenue Business Improvement District. She looks forward to seeing creative designs the new rules could bring, but she worries they could also pose challenges. She pulls out what looks like a map of her district. Restaurants that will have to get rid of their current dining sheds are marked in red. And there are many.
So basically all the restaurants on this side for like over 10 blocks.
Yeah, and it goes further. This is just our district.
So this is, I imagine, going to be a big impact on businesses.
Yeah, for sure. And
but new outdoor dining designs could improve sanitation, particularly the city's battle with its greatest enemies, rats. That's according to Jackson Chabot. He's with Open Plans, a non-profit that works to improve New York's street life.
What we've seen is that design can solve for a lot of these challenges. And so when we have structures that are not built on sand where rats like to burrow, we get a different result.
But one restaurant owner is happy to say goodbye to dining sheds. Luca Di Pietro owns an Italian restaurant chain, Tarallucci e Vino. He used to have sheds at 3 out of 5 of his locations, and he wants to remove the last one.
I just want to go back to a cleaner New York.
Do you have to pay to get the outdoor shed removed?
No, unless you want to come and remove it. No, it's not free. In fact, I've been talking to my handyman, and he said that he's going to give me a quote. But it's also upwards of $1,000 to remove that stuff. It's expensive.
Too expensive. That's what these restaurant owners say about the city's new recipe for outdoor dining sheds. But for those who do want to try, the first step is getting architectural plans drawn up, which then need to be approved by their local community board. If denied, they'll have to cook up a new plan. Cecilia Blotto, Columbia Radio News.
We now have more older adults than children in New York City, and many are struggling financially. The rate of poverty among seniors has skyrocketed over the past 2 decades. In 2022, a quarter of New Yorkers over 65 experienced poverty.
To help, the city says it will begin expanding deliveries of free meals for the elderly starting in July. Beth Finkel is with AARP New York. She's a fan of the new plan. She says it won't just provide food, but it will also fight loneliness.
It is a great step forward. At AARP, we have been looking at isolation for a very long time, and we know that isolation is the equal to smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of the effect on your heart.
We were talking about isolation, but we're also talking about meal services and food. What is the correlation between the two of them?
It's being so important. Somebody knocking at someone's door and checking in on them when they're delivering the meals. It's delivering the food itself, but it's also delivering some sociability, some extra checkpoint for folks to see when you are delivering food to somebody's home right? You are able to check in on them because that might be the only person knocking on Mrs. H's door that day, the only person that says, "Good morning, how are you? How are you feeling? You know, what's going on?" And though it's fleeting and they're not spending, you know, a half an hour in the apartment with them, it is still that touch point of feeling like you're still connected with other humans.
We talked about the meal services, but what other issues do you want to see addressed in the city?
We would like, when people come in for Medicaid, they should be automatically opted into the SNAP benefit because obviously if you're eligible for Medicaid, you're going to be eligible for SNAP. We also would like to see data matching. There are a lot of other programs that people are on or applying for that actually would make them eligible for SNAP. And the way the computer systems are working right now in New York City, they've figured out a way to do it for family and children, which is fabulous. But we'd like to see them take care of it for older adults. There's absolutely no reason why 65 plus were left out of a way to make sure that people get the benefits they need when they need them.
Beth Finkel, State Director, AARP. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clara. Appreciate it.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come, so stay with us.
Welcome back to Uptown Radio. I'm Clara Bouders.
And I'm Dominic Hall-Thomas.
Coming up, we'll hear why New York City's Attorney General Letitia James is taking on the beef industry.
At the same time, meat alternatives like Beyond Meat are failing to find their fans.
And you know how those small everyday interactions with our neighbors can make a big difference? We hear from one cheerful Upper East Side security guard.
But first, it's time for the headlines.
For Columbia Radio News, I'm Cecilia Blotto. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump have both arrived at the US-Mexico border. Both will be talking about immigration, a critical campaign issue. This marks a rare visit by President Biden, who has traveled to the border only once before. He is set to speak shortly with border agents in Brownsville about legislation that aims to restrict migrants from seeking asylum if they crossed illegally. About 300 miles away in Eagle Pass, Donald Trump will also make remarks. Trump has made immigration enforcement one of his top priorities if he were re-elected in November. A wildfire in Texas Panhandle has become the largest in state history, according to officials. The Smokehouse Creek fire has now extended over 1 million acres, and it's spread into Oklahoma. So far, we know one person has been killed. According to the Texas A&M Forest Service, only 3% of the fire has been contained.
With high winds behind it, these fires are just moving quicker than anybody can kind of get around at this point.
One of the country's hardest hit is Hemphill County, home to over 85% of Texas cattle. Thousands of these have been killed by the fires. As locals prepare for a potential evacuation, Texas Governor Greg Abbott sent additional resources, including 94 firefighting personnel, in an attempt to contain the fires. And in Gaza, over 100 Palestinian civilians have been killed and 700 injured in an incident in western Gaza City. According to officials in Gaza, Israeli Defense Forces opened fire on people awaiting for food aid. However, Israeli officials say it was a reaction to a security threat. The Gaza Health Ministry has described the incident as a massacre, and it comes as the death toll has reached an estimated 30,000. The death toll may be higher than what's been announced, as hospitals that keep count of victims through electronic databases have either been besieged or attacked. Many people are also said to be stuck under rubble, waiting to be found. Russian President Vladimir Putin made a State of the Nation speech today, warning that the West risks sparking a nuclear war if NATO sends troops into Ukraine. Here's Putin's translated speech by the BBC.
We can recall what happened to those who used to send their contingents to our country. The consequences for these potential intruders will be much more tragic now.
The 2-hour speech comes just days after the second anniversary of the start of Russia's war in Ukraine, and 2 weeks before Russia's elections. One of Putin's primary opponents, Alexei Navalny, will be buried tomorrow in Moscow. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Cecilia Blotto.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Dominic Hall-Thomas.
And I'm Clara Bouders. It seems like Americans are just not that into plant-based meats, and some companies hoped. One of the best-known, Beyond Meat, reported disappointing fourth-quarter earnings on Tuesday. Analysts say the high prices for Beyond Meat products are partly to blame. Fahima Degia reports on how some vegan New Yorkers are concerned about access to vegan products in general.
Gristedes is a New York supermarket on 103rd Street. When you enter, you find vegan food options in different aisles. One of the first things you see is a variety of hummus and spreads.
It is. 10:59. Do you not? Oh my gosh. I can eat this in like 3 seconds.
That's Isaiah Speller, a vegan of 5 years from Brooklyn. He says that the cost of vegetables is already expensive and it makes it hard to meet the requirements of the food.
This is Greeless vegan grilling cheese, and this is $10.99. Goat cheese, butternut squash, and sage. Okay, so this is like $6.99. Oh my gosh, and I can eat this. Maybe I can spread this into 2 days.
When he walks us down all the way to the back of the grocery store to add protein from the vegan section of Beyond Meat products, the prices are even higher.
12 plant-based meatballs in here. So this thing costs $10.99. Now let's go to the Beyond Sausage. This one is $12.99, and they only have 4 links of sausage.
Speller says Beyond Meat products are too expensive for his budget of $250 every 3 weeks. The solution, according to expert John Stanton, professor of food marketing at St. John's University, is for vegan companies to focus on the customers they already have.
It seems to me that there is a market for vegan food amongst people that are vegans, and that's where they have to be able to be profitable, not to grow to these huge numbers. Take advantage of people who want to try it. And you know, not necessarily lower price, because if most of your customers are loyal, you know, lifestyle focused people, then they will pay the higher price.
I spoke with Richard Schatz, a butcher shop owner with a family business that's been around for 110 years.
This is called a biro machine. It's 90 years old. It's made out of pure steel. Let's go into the grinder now. This is a 250-pound grinder. This is 95 years old. That's how we grind the fresh meat.
He had no idea that Beyond Meat products was going out of business.
It's not Beyond Meat, it's real meat, but it's still good.
Do you hope that the decline in the vegan industry will bring you more business?
Being biased, I want people to buy meat. I would hope, selfishly, that if there was no such thing as a vegan tomorrow and I had 100 extra customers, it would be very nice.
For Stanton, this is about how long these vegan companies can keep customers interested in their products. This is not a vegan or meat issue. It's about the bottom line. Fahima Degia, Columbia Radio News.
Yesterday, New York Attorney General Letitia James filed a lawsuit against agricultural giant JBS. JBS is the country's largest producer of beef. The company says that over the last few years, it has made efforts to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. James, however, is less sure of their efforts. Earlier today, I spoke with Peter Lehner, an attorney at Earth Justice, a non-profit focusing on environmental law, to see what's at stake with this lawsuit. Peter Lehner from Earth Justice, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dominic. Great to be here.
What's the basis of this lawsuit? What are they going for with this?
The lawsuit is under the Attorney General's authority to prevent consumer fraud. They have the authority to make sure that companies that are selling goods aren't essentially lying to consumers. In this case, the Attorney General is challenging JBS, the world's largest beef company, for claiming that they're going to reach net zero by 2040. that is what the law would refer to as an aspirational claim. The law is crystal clear that even an aspirational claim has to have something behind it. I can't say I'm going to win Wimbledon next year and say, well, it's just aspirational.
They say that they are taking steps towards becoming at least a less damaging business. Can you just run me through what some of those steps that they say they are taking actually are?
Well, I think it's important to look at the steps in the context of how big their emissions are. Their emissions are, according to the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, about the size of the entire country of Spain. And the emissions from meat production are tricky emissions to solve. They include, for example, clean energy at their slaughterhouses. Not a bad thing to do. But emissions from their slaughterhouses are probably only a couple % of the total emissions in a piece of meat. Most come from the animal itself, from the feed production, from the deforestation, et cetera. They also claim they sponsor some research in feed additives that could be given to cattle so that they belch less methane.
So this is something that you specifically put into feed to mean that they produce less greenhouse gases.
That's correct. Again, a good thing, but studies that have been conducted have shown that there are some feed additives on the market, and they may reduce methane production, but reducing those methane emissions by 100% is far more significant a challenge.
Why do you think the Attorney General has decided to bring this lawsuit now?
The complaint notes that JBS knows that consumers care about trying to eat sustainably. Beef has such a large climate footprint. So they want to tell consumers, oh, don't worry, we've got it under control. And the complaint says you can't say that, and the law is clear. That's what a consumer fraud is all about.
Some farmers would say that they are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because environmental policies are perhaps going to negatively affect their business. And at the same time, the price of food is going down. And the only way that they can make their business profitable is by having these kind of mega farms. Do you have any sympathy for that argument?
I have a ton of sympathy for small farms, people who are trying to farm in a sustainable way that is decent for the climate, for the water nearby, their community, their animals. And yes, unfortunately, farm policy often does not reward them adequately. By far, the majority of subsidies and support the federal government provides go to the biggest farms. The U.S. Department of Agriculture does a survey called the Census of Agriculture. And the survey based on 2022 data just came out last week. And it shows that yet again, the number of farms has declined. It's largely a loss of small farms. And so if you're a farmer trying to do it right, you definitely feel that the deck is stacked against you.
Peter Lehner, thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure.
For a lot of us, ChatGPT has been our first introduction to the seeming magic of artificial intelligence. For news organizations, ChatGPT is only the tip of the iceberg. Big outlets like Bloomberg, Washington Post, and Reuters all have created their own AI tools, including the ones that turn massive amounts of data into information in their reporting. But as Pascal Hogue reports, journalists are grappling with the ethics of using these new tools.
So today we're going to make some charts with code.
On a weekday evening, about 20 people are gathered around a large table at Columbia Journalism School with their laptops, eager to learn an increasingly relevant skill, harnessing AI to analyze data.
If you're stuck, just raise your hand, or you can put one of these pink stickies on the back of your computer and we'll come by and help you when we see it.
Even here, what AI can do is moving so fast that the instructors themselves are barely keeping pace. Jamil Mehta, one of the instructors, tells the attendees that it's reordering this teaching.
Lessons that I used to give at near the end of the second semester of the data program are now things that we talk about at the very beginning.
Sarah Gottfredson is an experienced journalist who uses a lot of big data in her reporting. She's taking the workshop to learn how to prompt ChatGPT to write code that will rapidly visualize numbers.
So for projects that are more coding heavy, it has been very useful for me. I would never use it to produce text or content that people will read. I will only use it for behind the scene reporting and data analysis.
Of course, there are risks with using these tools, but Gottfredson says journalists have had to be cautious before.
It's kind of like how we approached Wikipedia when that first came out. It's a great source of information, but it's also very wrong, and you shouldn't take it at face value.
That analogy to the early days of Wikipedia is close.
Maybe, because it was still could be edited by anyone, but they didn't have a lot of the protections on important pages that they do nowadays.
The Pointers Institute's Alex Mahadevan says the difference is that Wikipedia has built-in transparency.
If I don't trust it, I can go follow a link and see the source for myself. You can't really do that with ChatGPT or Claude or Bing. You can't trust anything that it spits out.
Mahadevan has taught media literacy to hundreds of journalists and news consumers. He says right now, the way AI works is like a black box, an impenetrable system. So when it comes to journalism, there's always going to be a question of trust.
And generally with good investigations, they have like a methodology box at the bottom where they explain, here's how we generated this data. And so they would explain how the AI works.
Back at Columbia Journalism School, Arushi Sashpal, one of the instructors, has some final thoughts. The fundamentals remain the same.
Do what journalists do best, ask questions.
And that means applying the same ethical standards to AI.
You always should critique and fact check and double check what you see so that if you are using technology, use it in a way that you're not like trying to dismay an audience or trying to say something that is not true. And that comes from having working knowledge.
And with AI influencing how we create and consume news, grasping its in and outs helps journalists navigate the digital age like pros. Full disclosure, ChatGPT wrote that last line. Pascal Hogue, Columbia Radio News.
One of the pleasures of living in New York City is the sort of everyday interactions you have with strangers. Our reporter Dean Condoleo moved to the Upper East Side last summer, and now a school security guard has become a joyful part of his mornings.
On 89th Street, between Lexington and Park Avenues, everyone gets the same type of greeting from Jerome Delagarde.
Hey, how you doing? Good morning. Hey, good morning. All right. There she goes. Good morning. How you doing?
It's a great job. I love interacting with the kids and the staff. It's a great job. It's very fun. Entertaining as far as like saying good morning to all the staff and greeting them and dismissal in the afternoon.
Jerome works at the prestigious Dalton School. He works in security, but it's a pretty different gig than the 30 years he spent in law enforcement.
I was a correction officer, and then I did federal transports for the Marshal Service. I did move federal prisoners back and forth to court.
Jerome started working at the Dalton School 2 years ago. His favorite part of his current job?
Just enjoying the good mornings, like, smiles on the kids' faces when they come in, and then also enjoying the kids when they perform in the plays. They have plays at the school where they have middle school and high school plays. It's almost like Broadway, and I love the theater.
And his second favorite part?
The perks. I get weekends off. Weekends and holidays off, summers off, spring break, winter break. That's the greatest thing. I don't have to worry about vacation time.
Students and school staff aren't the only greeting suspects for Jerome. People walking on East 89th Street on their way to work, to walk their dog, or just to get coffee are destined to get a
good morning. Hey, good morning, guys. How you doing? All right, stay warm.
Out of Jerome.
Whatever that's going through their, how their day is going or their morning is going, just, saying hello just brings your spirit up to another level, and for me, it warms my heart. Keeps me warm on these cold days.
And for those of us lucky enough to get Jerome's greeting each day, it adds an extra layer of warmth.
Jerome, have a great day.
Take care, you too.
Yes.
Dean Condoleo, Columbia Radio News.
Earlier in the show, we said that Alton Scott, who was slashed on the A train in Brooklyn this morning, was in a stable condition. However, he has since been released from hospital. And in other good news, today is a leap day. This somewhat remarkable day comes once every 4 years. You remember how we learned that a year was technically 365 and a fourth days long? Well, today is the day when those fourth days add up to a whole day.
Yes, did you know that Leap Day exists because it takes slightly more than 365 days for the Earth to orbit the Sun? The extra 24 hours keeps the month in sync with annual events, like, for example, Dom?
Equinoxes and solstices, obviously. It's a day when a lot of businesses offer Leap Day discounts and volunteer organizations encourage people to do something extra for others with their found day.
And of course, if it's your birthday, happy birthday.
I think that was too many happies.
Yeah, you're such an enthusiast. As a reporter, Desiree Nix-Forager found out, for some couples, it's also a day to tie the knot.
It's 9 a.m., and outside the Marriage Bureau this morning, couples are slowly arriving. They're about to step through the revolving doors, getting ready to legally bind their love. Dan Bayaja and Charlie Del Rosario are taking wedding photos. Del Rosario is in a dark suit, and Bayaja is wearing a short, white satiny dress. The couple looks nervous and excited.
So we've been together since Leap Day of 2016.
That's why they're getting married today. Del Rosario asked Bayaja to be his girlfriend 8 years ago on Leap Day. In case you forgot, that's February 29th. So he gave her 29 reasons why they should be together.
That's a lot of, very creative.
Some of the ideas are trash, but I just...
got to 29.
Yeah, I got it 29.
And a couple of anniversaries later, they're tying the knot. But Leap Day only comes so often, so Bayaja says on normal years, they'll celebrate their anniversary at the end of February, with one special anniversary every 4 years. Through the doors and inside the building, Odelis Lopez and Aiden Hernandez say they picked the date not for romance, but for another reason.
Actually, it's more cheaper for the gifts because it's every 4 years. Nah, just kidding.
But Lopez says she has strong feelings about getting married on February 29th.
I think 20 is an amazing number. It's the perfect number.
And so what does this mean for your guys' anniversaries? Are you guys going to be doing anniversaries every 4 years or every year?
I think we'll do it every year. Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's the 29th. Every year it's going to be an anniversary.
Amazing. But for some couples, Leap Day was not part of their wedding planning. Doris and Edwin had no idea.
Leap year. Interesting. You know, I love that movie. That's my favorite movie.
Really? And you didn't know that you were getting...
No, not until you said it. Now I'm excited.
Yeah, cool.
Besides, they had another problem on their mind. Their witness was not going to make it on time, and they had a favor to ask. Would I fill in? How could I say no to a bride on her wedding day?
We are gathered here today to witness the marriage between Edwin and Doris. Both have made a commitment to devote themselves to one another and have come together on this day to affirm their love.
They're not waiting another 4 years to celebrate. Instead, they're kicking things off today, heading to Cancun for their honeymoon. Desiree Nix-Forager, Uptown Radio News.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our foreman today was executive producer Maureen Saint. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Zoe Yee.
Director Julia Leo coordinated our studio production with Dean Candeleo and Irina Humaniuk.
Our web editor is Samuel Eli Shepherd. Senior editor was Pascal Hogue.
Sam also delivered our local newscast along with Cecilia Blotto and day reporters Desiree Nix-Forager and Fahima Deja. Brought to you the latest on the ground in New York.
Our instructors, Sally Herships, Kerry Donahue, and Priscilla Alabi, advised our staff, and we're your hosts. I'm Dominic Cool-Thomas.
And I'm Clara Bouders. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays, Thursdays, better said, at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.